The sun in Buckeye, Arizona, doesn't just rise. It arrives with a physical presence. It presses down on the vast, open landscape, a silent, heavy weight that bleaches the color from the sky and bakes the earth into a fractured mosaic of rust and beige. By 9 a.m. on June 23, 2021, that weight was already immense. The air, thick with the dry, resinous scent of creosote bush and the faint, dusty smell of sun-baked rock, was beginning to shimmer. This is a land of deceptive stillness, a place where the silence is a living thing, broken only by the chatter of a cactus wren or the sudden, startling buzz of a cicada. It's a place that demands respect, a place that can swallow secrets whole. And on that morning, it was about to receive a new one. Daniel Robinson, at 24 years old, was a man who understood this landscape. As a field hydrogeologist for Matrix New World Engineering, his job was to read the desert's hidden language, to understand the secrets of the water that flowed unseen, deep beneath the cracked soil. He was a scientist, a man of logic and observation. Born and raised in Columbia, South Carolina, he was an adventurer by nature, a soul who, despite being born without his right forearm and hand, never saw limitations, only challenges to be met. His family remembers a young man with an infectious, easy smile, someone who loved to travel, to explore, to connect with people. He was the kind of person who, after moving 2,000 miles from home, still made sure to call his father, David, regularly, their bond a constant thread stretching across the country. His move to Arizona after graduating from the College of Charleston was a natural fit for his adventurous spirit. The desert, with its stark beauty and geological wonders, was a vast, open-air laboratory. His work took him to its most remote corners, places where paved roads surrender to dusty, rutted tracks, where the only landmarks are the skeletal arms of the saguaro cactus reaching for the relentless sky. On that June morning, he was at one such site, a pinprick on the map near Sun Valley Parkway and Cactus Road, tasked with inspecting a new well. It was a routine part of a job he loved, a job that allowed him to be outdoors, to read the story written in the layers of rock. But something about that morning was different. Something was deeply, unsettlingly wrong. The desert, in its profound and ancient silence, was watching. The last person to see Daniel Robinson was a man he had just met. Ken Elliott, a contractor with Weber Waterworks, was at the remote well site when Daniel arrived in his blue 2017 Jeep Renegade. The initial interaction was normal, the kind of professional small talk that passes between colleagues at the start of a workday. They discussed the job, the blistering heat that was already building, the mundane details of their shared task. But then, a change, a sudden, inexplicable shift in Daniel's demeanor. Ken would later describe it to investigators as a kind of disconnection. Daniel, the normally engaging and focused geologist, seemed to drift away, his gaze lost in the shimmering distance of the desert. He would stare out, motionless, at the landscape, a vast panorama of rock, sand, and thorny scrub, as if watching something only he could see. The air was still, the heat palpable, the silence broken only by the hum of the Jeep's engine. Ken tried to draw him back, to re-engage him in conversation, but Daniel's responses became vague, his focus fractured. He looked, Ken recalled, as if he were a million miles away. The distant look in his eyes wasn't one of distress. Not exactly. It was more like profound distraction, a 1,000-yard stare into the soul of the desert. He asked Ken an odd question. "Do you want to go back to Phoenix?" Then, without waiting for a real answer, Daniel Robinson did something that would set in motion a mystery that endures to this day. He turned, walked back to his Jeep, climbed in, buckled his seatbelt, gave a final, inscrutable wave, and drove away. Not back toward the main road, but deeper into the desert, his blue Renegade, kicking up a plume of dust that hung in the still air long after the vehicle had disappeared from sight. For David Robinson, the first sign of trouble came not as a sudden alarm, but as a slow, creeping dread. Back in South Carolina, the rhythms of his son's life were a familiar comfort. Daniel was responsible, always in touch. So when calls and texts at Daniel's phone that afternoon went unanswered, a knot of unease began to tighten. The feeling intensified when a colleague of Daniel's called, explaining that he hadn't returned from the job site. It was out of character. It wasn't Daniel. David's mind, the mind of a father and a retired Army veteran, began to race through the possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. The desert is a place of extremes. A simple mechanical failure, a wrong turn, a medical emergency, any of these could quickly escalate into a life or death situation under the brutal Arizona sun. By 7 p.m., with the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple, the creeping dread had hardened into cold certainty. Something was wrong. David Robinson officially reported his son missing to the Buckeye Police Department. That phone call marked the beginning of a new, unwelcome chapter in his life, transforming him from a loving father into a relentless investigator, a man driven by a singular, desperate mission to find his son. In the days that followed, the official search began. Police officers on foot and in all-terrain vehicles scoured the area around the well site. Helicopters and drones chopped through the hot, dry air, their cameras scanning the unforgiving terrain for any sign of the blue Jeep, any clue that might point to where Daniel had gone. They searched an area of over 70 square miles, a vast and intimidating wilderness of ravines, canyons, and sun-scorched plains. The search was extensive, but the desert held its secrets close. For 26 agonizing days, there was nothing. No Jeep, no Daniel, just the oppressive silence and the gnawing, ever-present question: where did he go? On July 19, 2021, nearly a month after Daniel Robinson vanished, a local rancher riding his property made a grim discovery. There, nestled in a deep, rocky ravine less than 3 miles from the well site, was the blue Jeep Renegade. It was on its side, battered and broken, the silent testament to a violent event. The discovery was a jolt, a sudden, brutal development in a case that had been defined by a lack of answers. The Buckeye Police Department descended on the scene, cordoning off the area and beginning the painstaking process of documenting the crash site. The Jeep's airbags had deployed, suggesting a significant impact. Yet, strangely, there was no blood inside the vehicle. Outside, scattered on the ground as if they'd been casually discarded, were Daniel's work clothes, his safety vest, his boots, his cell phone, his wallet, and his keys. It was a scene that raised far more questions than it answered. If Daniel had been in a serious accident, why would he get out, strip off his clothes, and leave behind his phone and wallet, his lifelines to the outside world? The desert is no place to wander without water, without protection from the elements. The placement of the items felt wrong, staged. To the investigators and to Daniel's family, it didn't feel like the chaotic aftermath of a crash. It felt like something else entirely. As forensic teams combed the area, they found no footprints, no sign of a struggle, nothing to indicate which direction Daniel might have gone. It was as if he had simply stepped out of the wrecked vehicle and evaporated into the shimmering heat. The desert had given up the Jeep, but it was holding fast to the man who had been driving it. The discovery of the Jeep Renegade should have been a breakthrough, the first solid piece of evidence in a baffling disappearance. Instead, it became the epicenter of the mystery, a puzzle box of contradictions and anomalies that has confounded investigators and fueled a father's quest for truth. The official theory from the Buckeye Police Department began to coalesce around a tragic but simple narrative. Daniel, possibly disoriented from a crash or suffering a mental health crisis, had wandered off into the desert and succumbed to the unforgiving elements. It's a story that happens all too often in this vast, dangerous landscape. But for David Robinson, this explanation never felt right. The details didn't add up. He took matters into his own hands, hiring a private investigator and an accident reconstructionist, Jeff McGrath, to conduct an independent analysis of the evidence. What McGrath uncovered from the Jeep's black box, its event data recorder, was explosive. The data showed that after the airbags deployed, A catastrophic event that should have ended the vehicle's journey, the ignition had been cycled more than 40 times. Even more shocking, the data suggested the Jeep had been driven for an additional 11 miles after the crash that deployed the airbags. This was a bombshell. It directly contradicted the simple narrative of a single tragic accident. How could a severely damaged vehicle be driven for 11 miles? Who was trying to start it? Over and over again. David Robinson seized on this data as proof of his deepest fear: foul play. He envisioned a scenario where his son was in an initial accident somewhere else, and the Jeep was later moved, driven to the ravine, and pushed in to stage a crash scene. It was a horrifying theory, but to David, it was the only one that fit the bizarre evidence. The Buckeye police, however, disputed this interpretation. They suggested the ignition cycles could have been triggered during the vehicle's recovery and their own data extraction process. They claimed the 11-mile discrepancy was not unusual for Jeep systems and could be an anomaly. This chasm between the father's investigation and the official police narrative would come to define the case, creating a deep rift of mistrust and leaving the central questions hanging, unanswered, in the suffocating Arizona heat. Was it a tragic accident or a cleverly disguised crime scene? The little black box held the data, but the truth remained stubbornly out of reach. As investigators, both official and private, picked apart the mechanical riddles of the Jeep, another, more personal, line of inquiry was unfolding. Police, digging into Daniel's life in the weeks before he vanished, uncovered a series of text messages that painted a picture of a young man in some emotional turmoil. He had recently met a woman named Courtland while delivering groceries for Instacart. According to the text exchanges, Daniel had developed a powerful infatuation with her, one that was not reciprocated. He showed up at her home unannounced, sent her messages declaring his love, and continued to contact her even after she explicitly asked him to leave her alone. Her final message to him was blunt: "I don't hate you, but please leave me alone." This discovery added a new, deeply human layer to the mystery. Could unrequited love have sent Daniel into a spiral of despair? Friends and family acknowledged that he had seemed a bit withdrawn in the days leading up to his disappearance. One coworker told police that Daniel had talked about wanting to change himself. Was it possible that emotional distress had led him to drive recklessly into the desert, to simply walk away from everything? His family, however, pushed back against this narrative. While they didn't deny the interactions with Courtland, they were adamant that Daniel was not suicidal. He had plans for the future. He was excited about his life. His father, David, spoke to him regularly and heard no hint of serious depression. He was a happy-go-lucky person, they insisted, not someone who would end his own life. This conflict presented two starkly different portraits of Daniel Robinson. One was a young man heartbroken and acting erratically, perhaps leading to a tragic but self-inflicted end. The other was a vibrant, ambitious man with everything to live for, whose strange behavior in his final hours was not a sign of a mental break, but perhaps a reaction to an external threat. Someone who didn't walk away from his life, but had it taken from him. The truth of Daniel's state of mind became another fiercely debated piece of the puzzle. His final interactions and a coworker's observation of his distant look, scrutinized for clues that might explain the inexplicable. The young geologist, a man of science and fact, had himself become a mystery, his inner world as remote and unreadable as the desert landscape that held him captive. In the world of true crime, there are the facts, and then there is the speculation that grows in the spaces between them. The Daniel Robinson case, with its abundance of strange evidence and lack of clear answers, became fertile ground for theories to take root and flourish, particularly in the digital wilderness of online forums and social media. The internet became a public detective's office, with armchair investigators from around the world poring over every available document, every photograph, every interview, searching for the key that would unlock the case. One of the most persistent theories, and the one held by Daniel's own father, centers on foul play connected to his work. As a hydrogeologist, Daniel was involved in assessing water resources for future development in a state or water is more precious than gold. Some theorists posit that Daniel discovered something he wasn't supposed to, perhaps evidence of illegal water drilling, or data that would halt a lucrative construction project. In this narrative, his strange behavior on his last morning wasn't a sign of emotional distress, but of fear. Perhaps he was trying to warn his coworker, or perhaps he was meeting someone in the desert, a meeting that turned deadly. The staged crash scene, the wiped cell phone data in this theory, it all points to a professional, cold-blooded cover-up. A second set of theories focuses on a random, violent encounter. The Arizona desert, for all its beauty, can be a lawless place. People go there for target practice, for off-road vehicle recreation, and for more illicit activities. Did Daniel, after his initial crash, stumble upon something he shouldn't have seen? A drug deal? An illegal dumping site? Did he run into someone unstable? Someone who reacted with violence to a stranger appearing out of nowhere? This theory attempts to explain the missing body and the strange state of the crash scene, suggesting a panicked and clumsy attempt to hide a crime of opportunity. And then there is the theory that the police initially favored, that Daniel, distraught over his personal life and exhibiting erratic behavior, crashed his Jeep and in a state of confusion or psychosis, perhaps exacerbated by a head injury, wandered into the vast wilderness. Proponents of this theory point to cases of paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where people suffering from severe hypothermia, or in this case, perhaps hyperthermia, remove their clothing because they feel intensely hot. It could explain why his clothes were found outside the vehicle. In this tragic scenario, there is no villain, no conspiracy. There is only a young man, lost and alone, consumed by the brutal indifference of the desert. Each theory has its believers, its own set of supporting evidence cherry-picked from the case files. But without Daniel, they remain just that, theories. Whispers in the digital wind, trying to give voice to a silence that refuses to be broken. For David Robinson, theories are not enough. While police investigations and online forums debated the possibilities, he took action. The retired soldier channeled his grief and frustration into a relentless, boots-on-the-ground campaign to find his son. He relocated from his home in South Carolina to Arizona, transforming his life into a singular, all-consuming mission. He became a fixture in the Buckeye Desert, a man against a vast and unforgiving landscape. He established a base camp, a small outpost of hope in the wilderness, and from there, he launched his own investigation. He organized dozens of search parties, drawing in volunteers from across the country who were moved by his story and his unwavering determination. These searches were grueling, disciplined operations. David, drawing on his military background, divided the desert into grids. Teams of volunteers, on foot, on ATVs, and on horseback, systematically combed the harsh terrain under the blazing sun. They braved rattlesnakes, treacherous ravines, and the ever-present danger of dehydration. The silence of the desert was broken by their calls, the crunch of their boots on the gravel, the shared hope that the next rise, the next canyon, would yield an answer. The physical toll was immense, but the emotional weight was heavier still. With every empty mine shaft checked, every piece of sun-bleached trash examined, the hope that had propelled them forward was met with the crushing reality of the desert's emptiness. In a heartbreaking twist, David's search for his son has brought closure to other families. Over the course of their exhaustive efforts, his volunteer teams have discovered the human remains of at least 7 other individuals, other lost souls who had been swallowed by the desert. Each discovery was a somber, bittersweet moment, a tragedy for one family, but an answer for another that had waited, just like David, for news. He has become an unwilling hero to these families, a man whose personal tragedy has provided solace to others. He has also become a fierce advocate for the missing, even running for Congress in South Carolina to bring attention to the plight of families like his own. He started a foundation, Please Help Find Daniel, calm, turning his personal quest into a national platform. But every set of remains that wasn't Daniel's was another turn of the knife. a reminder of the one answer he still desperately seeks. Years have now passed since Daniel Robinson waved from his Jeep and drove into the Arizona desert. The intense media spotlight that once shone on his case has dimmed, moving on to the next tragedy, the next mystery. But for his family, time has not healed the wound. It has only deepened the not knowing. The official investigation by the Buckeye Police Department remains open but inactive. They maintain that, without new evidence, they have exhausted all their leads. They stand by their assessment that foul play is not suspected, a stance that continues to be a source of profound frustration and anger for David Robinson. The desert itself has changed little. The sun still beats down with the same intensity. The saguaros still stand as silent witnesses. The wind still whispers through the canyons, carrying secrets it will not share. The questions that have haunted this case from the beginning remain unanswered, hanging in the dry desert air. Why did Daniel's behavior change so suddenly on that final morning? What is the real story behind the 40-plus ignition cycles and the 11 extra miles on the Jeep's black box? Did he discover a dangerous secret related to his work? Did he have a chance encounter with violence in the remote wilderness? Or did he simply walk away, lost in a private sorrow, to be reclaimed by the earth? The case of Daniel Robinson is a story with no final chapter. It is a story about a brilliant young man, full of promise, who vanished into one of America's last great wildernesses. It is a story about the collision of technology and terrain, where black box data and GPS pings are rendered moot by the sheer scale and indifference of nature. But most of all, it is the story of a father who refuses to let the silence win. A father who still walks the desert grids, his eyes scanning the horizon, listening for an answer that has not yet come. He is a testament to the enduring power of hope against a landscape of loss. A father searching for his son in a quiet mystery that the desert has yet to solve.